Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Anar and I'm a self-taught software developer. And on this channel, I help you break into and grow in the tech industry. Today, I'm going to get into the benefits and the drawbacks of working at a startup when compared to a large multinational corporation. I have worked at both startups and large companies, and while I do have my own opinion, I'd rather share some key insights as well as some major reasons I myself and others I know prefer to work at startups or major corporations. This way, you'll be educated to make the decision of what's best for you. The first reason why many people prefer working at startups over large companies is because their work can have a larger impact. This is especially true for software developers because it is not uncommon to be hired into a startup where the application is still in very early stages of development. Having the opportunity to be a major contributor and watch the application grow through your work can be satisfying. When you join a large company, however, you're more likely to have a significantly smaller impact because there is a lot of bureaucracy, much more employees, and the application tends to be significantly larger. Facebook, for example, has thousands or tens of thousands of software developers. So naturally, if you join a company like Facebook, you won't get as much satisfaction from building small features in a large application like Facebook as you would doing foundational work on an application where the team only consists of 5, 10, or 50 software developers. This leads me into my next point, which is learning. Making a large impact on an application in its early stages of development often means you are still solving the core problems. We can use Facebook as an example again. If you joined Facebook back when they were a small startup, you would have to solve social networking, back before it was done well by anybody else. If you join them now, however, you'd be working on something significantly less foundational. Typically in a startup, you will have more opportunities to make foundational decisions, such as what programming languages to use, technologies to use, databases, etc. In large companies, learning is further inhibited by the bureaucracy. At a startup, making a decision like what programming language to use can be done in a meeting, whereas in a large company, you're likely to go through a long bureaucratic process involving forms and approvals. The next big reason that gets people to gravitate towards a startup or a large corporation is equity. Equity is given out in the form of stock options or restricted stock units, or RSUs for short. It's important to make a distinction between large tech companies and large non-tech companies because the way they give out equity differs significantly. A large non-technology company like Coca-Cola or Walmart does not give any equity to most of their employees. Startups give out equity in the form of stock options. This means if the startup goes through an acquisition or a series of funding, then those options can be materialized into money. Typically, most employees at startups get stock options, and the earlier you join, the more stock options you get. Large technology companies like Google or Amazon give out equity in the form of RSUs. The way RSUs work is when you join, you're promised a certain amount of stocks from the day you join that materialize over a vesting period. Vesting periods are typically 3 to 5 years, and you get portions of the stocks granted to you as you go through these 3 to 5 years. A key difference between RSUs and stock options is that the RSUs will be granted to you no matter what as the vesting period proceeds, whereas stock options require a unique event which may never come. You may work at a startup for 20 years and it may never get acquired. That's not to say that one is better than the other, they just work a little bit differently. Staying on the topic of compensation related items, large companies win over startups when it comes to benefits and different financial perks. Some examples of these financial perks that large companies tend to have that startups usually do not is paid gym memberships, retirement contributions, and things like that. Another major difference between startups and big companies, and more specifically big tech companies, is the hiring process. Startups usually have the fastest hiring process with at most 2 or 3 interviews, and they get back to you pretty quickly. Big non-technology companies can be a little bit slower, but the difficulty of the interviews is typically around the same. Big technology companies differ in this regard significantly. It is not uncommon for the hiring process of a big technology company to involve 7 or 8 interviews. The majority of these interviews tend to be technical, testing your algorithm, data structure, and system design skills. I mentioned bureaucracy in large companies, but I want to highlight that just bureaucracy itself is often the reason many people steer away from large companies altogether. In startups, you usually don't have to attend as many meetings, go through irrelevant training programs, have performance reviews or evaluations. The last major reason I will mention that some people prefer larger companies over startups is job security. It is not uncommon to see a startup shut down. Personally, I think job security is a bit of an illusion because even in a large company, you can have layoffs and things like that. You can take the points I mentioned and review them for yourself, and you'll notice that you gravitate towards a specific type of company, often based on your personality. People that like a lot of freedom, like moving around, trying different things, learning different things, making a big impact, typically prefer startups. People that prefer a lot of structure, are comfortable with bureaucracy, want something relatively safer, tend to go for large companies. It's important to mention that every company is different. This is kind of like a disclaimer. The attributes I mentioned are often found in startups and large companies, but it's not always the case. There are always exceptions. I'm going to wrap it up here. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.